I want to make a disclaimer that this is Skid Row History Museum, so part of the role that this space plays is to document all the fascinating, amazing things that happen here and all the great, wonderful people, including yourselves. So we are documenting this event, and so there's video footage. There's also a reporter here that's covering the event as well. And so if you have objections to being photographed or included, just let folks know so your face doesn't end up on the cover if you don't want it on the cover of something. But we do record our discussions just to tell the story of Skid Row. And so I'm really honored to be here, and I'm also honored to curate this exhibit. My name is Charles Porter, Charles Wayne Porter III. And Charles Wayne. Had nothing to do with my name. But I do give honor and respect to my parents. I give honor and respect also to our ancestors and all the people that came before us. So whenever we start events, we should always acknowledge the land, acknowledge the keepers of the land, the people whose bodies are in the ground beneath our feet, and those who gave their lives so we could be here. So our work is a testament to their work, and may we leave a legacy so the people that come behind us are able to celebrate and add on. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the exhibit, and then I'm going to introduce two of my mentors and let them do their thing, and then we'll save some time for questions and discussion. And so for people that are brand new to the exhibit, you'll see there are very colorful murals on the wall, some words on the wall, and so it is it's a 5-part story that's interconnected. You see networks of liberation, cosmology and community is the name of the exhibit. And it's really my storytelling of where I'm from, what's important to me and my people, and the work that I do to really uplift culture and uplift community and to collaborate with folks in the neighborhood. So a lot of folks in the audience I've worked with and have been comrades in the struggle. I appreciate everyone that has shown up, and hope you contribute to our conversations here. And so each station, when you have time to go through the exhibit, there's a little book, there's a folder that just explains what each section is about. And it's a really deep dive. There's a lot of documents. There's some archival stuff. I've been working in Skid Row since 1999. So I wasn't the first one to work in Skid Row. There were people that came before me, but there's just really good documentation from my work in the community, but also a little story of my background and my family coming from a free Black community in southern New Jersey, and just a lot of stories I never learned growing up that are very important and essential to wellness and healing. And so you see these networks of connection really deal with creating safe spaces and places of healing. And what I want to highlight is on the wall, all of these pieces they're like puzzle pieces that all come together to make a whole, and the pieces make the continent of Africa. So for me, it's just acknowledging my African heritage, but also acknowledging that Skid Row's predominantly Black community, and to really address some of the root causes of what's happening. We have to be aware of the experiences of Black people and come up with solutions that are responsive to that. So I'm gonna go through my notes real. How you asking questions in the intro?
Man. The murals. You talking about the murals?
Yes.
Who's the artist of the murals?
The lead artist was Dimitri. He's with the Catholic Workers.
Okay.
And there were other artists that supported him. And so so it's also a poem that I wrote, and so the murals connect to the poetry and also to the storytelling and what's in the binders. I forgot to mention also on the monitor, on the tablets, there are videos you can watch. So the videos are interviews, it's also just some documentaries. It's a lot of, as John mentioned, it takes a little while to go through everything. I'm not trying to bombard y'all, but it's interesting for folks that want to know more. There's a lot at each station. And so, so there's poetry, the murals also go together, and today we're talking about, the theme is in the fifth section, the fifth phase. And so I'm gonna run through my notes real quick so I don't miss nothing, then I'm gonna stop talking because you've heard me talk a lot. Let's see, it says on here, introduce the exhibit, that's done. Okay, station 5. So each station, it also has a theme and it has a proverb. So today, station 5, the theme is Ashe. And people use the word Ashe a lot. It's kind of like when people say amen or you give your blessing to it, Ashe. You hear people say that, like they witness that what you said is right or they support it. And that's a Yoruba word. So I use a lot of Yoruba terms to describe the concepts in each station. But the proverb, Ashe also means command. Ashe means power. The literal translation of Ashe is power or command. And that is the ability to make things happen. If you have Ashe, you can make things happen. And that's really the goal of this section, is to empower people, that you have the ability to implement what you want to see in this world and what you want to see in this community.
Define phenomenon. Make it act accordingly.
Ashe. And so the proverb that goes with that, it also links to accountability. So today's panel is going to talk about systemic change. And so the proverb is, it is in the presence of witnesses that one challenges the person who caused one injury. And so this talks about this whole concept of having witnesses see your experience and having a discussion about why that person did what they did, and having the community figure out what the consequences are. And so that's part of having power, is your ability to say what you did was wrong, you need to do something about it. And if it's only between two people, you can't have a resolution. And so that's why it involves community and the importance of community in dialogue and advocacy. So it's three A's we're gonna cover today. the syllabus. We have the first A is awareness. Okay, awareness. We gotta know what's going on. What's going on? The second A is accountability, and the third A is advocacy. So I'm hoping our discussion today touches on those points, just raising our awareness about what happened. What happened? The accountability piece deals with who's responsible for what happened. And then the advocacy is a discussion about how can we change it. And so just a few back stories I want to cover real quick before I pass the mic is, I work for a program called United Coalition East Prevention Project. It's a program, a social model. I mentioned I started working in Skid Row in '99. One of the first campaigns we had was around nuisance abatement and things that we learned from Community Coalition in South LA that our current mayor helped to found. And one of the things that nuisance abatement really looked at was holding people in the community that were business operators accountable for the activity that was occurring on their property. And so I think for me, that was really when we had to demonstrate that Skid Row was a neighborhood. And that's part of what this museum is designed to do, as well as to document Skid Row as a community, Skid Row as a neighborhood. And our early works with nuisance abatement, the head of the zoning department literally told us, okay, you documented all these problems, but what do you want us to do? This is Skid Row. As if Skid Row wasn't a neighborhood or a community. And our response is, well, what do you do in other neighborhoods? And he was perplexed. He was like, no, but this is Skid Row. And so that shows you, like, from the top, that people, when you don't see Skid Row as a neighborhood, the decisions you make aren't gonna support neighborhood or community. And so we learned that that as a neighborhood, that business owners, they have a responsibility to contribute to the good of the community. We also were involved in the fight, some of the folks that are in the audience now, our fight just for representation and voice as a community, our fight to create a Skid Row Neighborhood Council. And that's an example of just having the ability to define who we are, what we want, what's important for us. And we were successful in getting the Skid Row Park Advisory Board, so shout out to that. That is an official entity that exists that came from community advocacy. But we know that the struggle for representation has continued to have many challenges, as we see with the community plan process. That a lot of folks have been advocating so that the downtown community plan really is responsive to Skid Row and includes a piece on equity. And so one thing that I want to say before I pivot is just talk a little bit about some of the campaigns that are documented in the stations. So one is some early work we did was also around redefining Skid Row. And a former colleague that everyone knows, Kevin Michael Key. There are many Kevins, there are many Michaels, but there's only one Kevin Michael. He, if you know him, you knew he was always talking about Skid Row as the world's largest recovery community. And so that was also some work we were doing to change the narrative. Mary Lee was very instrumental, and we had when Jan Perry first came to office, we had a series of community meetings, and we were trying to define Skid Row as a safe haven neighborhood. And we were using the term safe haven. We were meeting with all of the stakeholders in the community to really show, okay, Skid Row is a safe haven. This is a place that supports recovery and wellness. People come here for support and assistance. And we were really trying to, I would say, incorporate some of the principles of what a responsive community, a healthy community looks like by using the term safe haven. That effort got co-opted by the police, which, you know, that was very disappointing because they were like, oh, that's a great idea, drug-free zone. We can increase penalties, and but we were like, whoa, that's not what we're talking about here. Nobody said lock up more people or, you know, treat everybody like a criminal. That wasn't our discussion. And so we had challenges with that concept, but we were trying to increase accountability, but also raise awareness of what is community, what is unique about Skid Row. We also, in July, we plan to do have another discussion about our work with the youth, and Dr. Grills was instrumental in documenting the experience of young people we were working with, and Mary Lee as well. And we're working on a project now where we followed up with some of the young people to see how their involvement with us affected their life. And so stay tuned for that, but I just want to highlight that the two ladies you see here were very instrumental in a lot of the work that we did in helping to frame our discussion of it and to document it and to really advocate our work at the refresh spot as well. Dr. Grills is really instrumental in helping to tell the story of how the refresh spot has impacted the community. And so just to document that. And then healing circles, we've incorporated healing circles into our work just to deal with some of the trauma. And so when we talk about systems, it's not always just policies. Some of it are also just practices that we can implement amongst ourselves that support community and support wellness. And so on that, I'm gonna stop yapping and I'm gonna pass the mic to my first speaker on my left right here. Both of our speakers have very extensive bios, but I'm not going to read you their
Expensive or expensive?
Extensive. Extensive. They've done a lot of work. They've influenced a lot of people, not just me. And so look them up. You'll see that I'm not making this up. This is real. But I'm just going to read the little tiny tagline on the flyer, because you may have seen the flyer and say, oh, that sounds interesting, I'm coming. So that'll be my way of introducing them. I've known them both for many years, and they've been very influential in the work that we do as an organization, but also just personally inspiring to see them do what they do, and two people that I consider to be geniuses. So this is a panel of geniuses. You know, it's the company that you keep. So this was all part of my elaborate plan for you to take photos of me sitting here with these two women. So I'm gonna introduce Mary Lee with a short, tiny intro, then I'm gonna let Mary Lee share some information with you. So, as we get older, reading, it becomes a different process. Mary Lee is an expert on public health advocacy to address land use policy, and she will share with us historic impacts of inequitable practices such as redlining, expanding healthy food access, and then some promising practices such as land trust, cooperatives, and whatever else she wants to share as well. Yeah, I asked that line right there. Without any further ado, Mary Lee.
Thank you very much. Can folks hear me? I really have to say that it is an honor to be here to do anything that acknowledges Charles Porter. He is such a mentor, such a role model, such a person that cares deeply, deeply about Black people, about people in general, and has really given his heart to Skid Row. And I've known him for this, 25, 30 years, long period of time, and just, there are many things about Charles that change, that grow, that develop, but the one thing that doesn't is his commitment and his fortitude and his determination. And so it's just a pleasure to do anything in honor of him. So I love the fact that this museum has taken some time to honor him, because he's really the kind of quiet force of nature for Skid Row. We call it sometimes the doctor, the professor.
Honorary doctor.
That's right. But the best kind of doctor. So I just have to say that just to start off with, and it's always a learning experience to be around Charles. He always tests my knowledge and tests my understanding and makes me go back and read some more. So I'm happy to be here. Charles gave me this topic that is enormous, and then said, well, 10, 15 minutes. So I don't exactly know what to stress. Wanting to address some of the issues as they've affected Skid Row, particularly in the last 30 years or so, which seems like a long period of time to be talking about. But for me, that is a microcosm of this era, this period of time that we really need to focus on and try to figure out this community in the larger context of what's happening nationally, internationally, as it relates to the attitude of oppression, of battle, I'm not even sure if I've come to the right place to talk about this in diplomatic terms, but to talk about what's happening in Skid Row as an illustration of a much, much larger problem that's all over the world, that has been all over the world for 500 years or more. And Cheryl and I know way too much, I think, when we talk about these sorts of things, and are focused, I think, on both the present, but with an eye to the past, and with an eye to understanding how the circumstances that we're in are something that we want to address, but we have to always realize that it's part of a much larger struggle. So that's what I'm going to try to focus on right now. Charles is right that for the past 25 or so years, maybe 26, somewhere around there, 25, 30 years, we've been working in Skid Row on a variety of things. USEP much more than me, in the sense of trying to address the circumstances in the community that set people up for addiction, even if they're not in addiction themselves, of having to live in circumstances that are well beyond their control, and yet they navigate them, they push against them, they are resilient and show their humanity every day of the week. And we raise that and we address that, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. What is difficult for me, though, is to understand, or to have the attention to be able to understand how that does play into the larger picture of what's happened nationally. And so I'm going to try and focus on that a little bit. Because we've spent the time, as Charles has indicated, talking about the operation of liquor stores, the operation of SRO housing, the operation of individuals with bad attitudes and bad actions that might have led to drug addiction. And we've learned about people who've been encountering the things that are assumed to be dangerous or violent or I don't know what the word is, but just you have to forgive me. I'm very, very jet lagged, so I'm not making a whole lot of sense. But we address those issues, and we have for a very long time. Things like challenging the operation of SROs, trying to insist that they not allow the properties to be occupied by certain people who are not of the community, who are literally taking advantage of the community, who are literally pushing and exploiting the presence that they have there in a way that's very dangerous. And we've challenged the lack of food, and we've challenged the lack of liquor store, laundromats, and all the kinds of necessary things of life that our communities are without. And we've done it in a way, as Charles indicated, that's challenged the assumption on the other side, the assumption of the business and the city regulators, that this is not a community. It is exactly a community. It is exactly a neighborhood where people have children, where children need the same kinds of places to play, need the same kind of opportunities to go to school. It is a place where single adults live, and they need the same kind of suggestions and supports that everybody else needs. And it's a neighborhood that needs and is entitled to the same sorts of protections and same sorts of whether it's police or health responses that any other community has. And yet Skid Row residents are always having to push this agenda and push this point with everybody, with every single quadrant of folks that might challenge them. They have, on the one hand, the local elected officials. They have another, the local police and fire and control enforcement mechanism. On the final front, they have the folks that are taking advantage and would exploit and assume the worst, or try to get the most mileage out of someone's potential or perhaps vulnerability toward addiction. That's, I'd say, a factor of 5 when it comes to comparing it to a normal neighborhood, or not, I wouldn't even say normal, comparing it to a neighborhood outside of this community, which society thinks is entitled to protections and supports and resources. And so it's already set up as an inequitable situation. The residents, the folks that live in Skid Row, are already ahead of the curve when it comes to challenging these realities, because they have to do 10 times more than communities outside the area in order to profess and expose their rights. And their ability to do that is always hampered by the attitudes of those who are in situations of power, situations of control. Now that's negative, and that's harsh, and that's difficult. But I'm trying to draw the picture for you that it is not unique to this system. It is actually a facet of the system that in some ways, I won't even say in some ways, it distracts and encourages people to be caught up in the moment and stop everybody from being able to understand the larger implications outside of this community, outside of even the United States, outside of even this era that we find ourselves in. What I'm trying to make the point of is that this is exactly the same sort of disturbance or disruption or um, dispossession, if you will, that racial and power dynamics set up every single time we tried in history, frankly, to challenge them. And as harsh as it is for Skid Row, and there's a tendency, I think, outside the city outside of this particular area, to assume that, oh, we can't do any better, it's just Skid Row. As Charles said, the zoning administrator has told us that on many, many occasions, or the attitudes are, well, we have a standard for LA, but then there's Skid Row, and that's a different standard because it's not nearly a one that anyone would live with. And there's such a discounting of the people who live here. And yet, if you look at the larger problem of racism, if you look at the larger problem of power and power dynamics through history, you find this is, as bad as it is just as likely to have happened, and is continuing to happen in places throughout the world, throughout the country, throughout history. So let me just, 5 seconds, and then I'm going to turn it over to Cheryl because I'm stumbling over my tongue. I just want to focus on the fact that, you know, I can talk, maybe not today, but on another day, I can talk about what we've done in the past to challenge the practices of businesses, to challenge the attitudes of the health department and all the other agencies that are supposed to be helpers, that are supposed to be taking care of and responding to the needs of the community. We could talk about the fact that those systems are not set up and refuse, frankly, to take advantage of opportunities to deal with the problems of folks in Skid Row. But so I could talk about that. But what I'd like to be able to do is to say that this approach isn't accidental, and it isn't recent, and it isn't the result of the behaviors or the limitations or any of the conduct of the people who live in the circumstance. You could literally replace any group of people in this community, and you'd see something very, very similar happen. It's the formal activity of public policy. It is the formal behavior of private conduct, which is sometimes influenced by that public policy, and sometimes it happens the other way around. The public policy gets driven by the private conduct. But it's that private conduct that is most indicative of folks with power, of folks with money, of folks with the ability to define a system that is intended to keep the fewest people well-resourced and well-supported, and to limit the access and even the knowledge of the masses of folks in the country and, frankly, in the world. And it's been done as a conquest form in this country since its formal conception. At the time that this nation was founded with Native Americans, the attitude of conquest, of conquering, of acquiring land, of deciding that land or property was more important, and claiming it despite the fact that others were there and owned it. That's been a tendency in this country since day one, and it's never, ever stopped. And we see it now, and 400 years later, and it looks very different to us, so that there's a tendency not to name it that way. But it really is the same exact thing. The same exact thing that's happened when someone's land is taken is happening now when people's property is taken, when someone's belongings are trashed and thrown away or moved to another place, or you're told, well, you'll come back and get this later on. You know, you see all the manifestations now, and there's a tendency to have folks think this is just happening to me, I'm just an individual, it's just about me. And yet, if we have the patience and have the opportunity to sit and talk about it, we really see a larger approach and a larger trajectory of why this is happening in common. And then you take upon that the 400 years of slavery, of enslavement, of literally having people's ability to call themselves by their own name, to be able to identify their own children, to be able to identify their own language, be able to identify their own circumstances and ceremonies and everything that goes along with that. That's another example of the same tendency projected 300-400 years in the future. And we can do it over and over and over again. We can go through the state of the, I'm sorry, not the state, but we can go through the history of the United States in tendencies and practices that enabled or that encouraged whites to move into certain parts of the country, to operate in certain parts of the country, to engage in land and by virtue of the land, engage in business in parts of the country. And every single one of those things, we see it's echoed in the current processes and practices of the cities, of the state, of the wealthy class in today's commerce. So, for example, the land grant process early on in the country in the 1800s, around the same time that slavery was ending, the United States was engaging in giving land grants to whites who would be able to get roughly, I think, 100 acres of land in order to just live on it, farm on it, for free, as long as they would clear it. And clearing it sounds, as a kid, I thought, oh, that meant clearing it like cutting the trees down or making it flat so that you could grow, I don't know, corn or something on it. But the clearance really meant getting rid of the Indians, getting rid of the Native Americans. And that same attitude of taking people out, putting people in, moving people around, that's been the attitude of the power forces in this country for all that time. And we still see it today in people being moved for the construction of a freeway, the construction of a museum, the construction of a school, the construction of housing, the construction of stadiums, all these sorts of things which define what Los Angeles is supposed to look like to somebody, but not ever hearing from what the people who were experiencing the situation have to say about it. And so every single one of the historical references I can make, the zoning processes, the Jim Crow laws, redlining being a financial situation or financial circumstances where land was, the city was divided up. There were 235 areas in the country that were defined as being eligible for investment, and yet certain areas within each community were designated as being high risk, and those high risks were colored red on a map, and those high risks equate with places where blacks live. And there's a lot of detail about what that looked like when the maps and the documents that go along with redlining were developed and designed. You saw that the presence of people of color living in those communities, particularly black and brown people, but also Filipinos, also people who were of a different faith. Any kind of difference was designated, written down, characterized as being negative. Words used in the descriptions that were almost impossible to read without being horrified at the way in which communities were described. And those differences in the 40s and the 30s seem to justify the investment of money in affluent areas and the denial of money in areas that were occupied by people of color. And yet, the fact that people of color occupied certain areas wasn't just an accident. We're steered and pushed in those communities and have been since the beginning. And then to take the investment away from those communities, it's just a self-fulfilling prophecy that continues this pathway on and on and on. And there's a whole bunch of other law and practices and policies that stem from that same sort of attitude. And I guess my point is that we have to see how similar that treatment is today. We have to see how the attitudes of us against them, of negative against positive, of individual responsibility being assumed, except everybody in the group is treated as one in such a way as it limits and destabilizes whole communities. And that's happened time and time and time and time again, so that keep going forward into the future in terms of urban renewal programs, in terms of public works and zoning, in terms of freeways and other kinds of construction. Every single time these things happen, and there's so many stories, there's so many examples of it throughout the country I could cite, but I don't really need to, because your existence here proves the point that you've got somebody in your family, you've got somebody in your circle of friends, or you yourself, who's lived through this sort of distinction and division and disadvantage. Even if you haven't felt the impact of it, it's there, and please do me a favor. Never, ever, ever go without sleep. It's just not possible. But anyway, I'm usually a much better talker than this. Anyway, the point, I'm almost done. So again, the last point I'm trying to make is there's just this a whole history, a whole approach to this. We keep coming up with different names, we keep coming up with different language for it, and yet the approach is almost always identical, that we've named a community which is going to be disadvantaged without it even being aware, frankly, of the circumstance most of the time, and then action is taken that justifies whatever is going to help keep one group in a superior position and perhaps even higher than the position they've had, and keep another group down. And so today we talk about gentrification. Today we talk about the subprime effect, or the housing bubble, or all of these sorts of things, which are all on the face very neutral, very, very, very distant from attitudes of race. They seem like, oh, you either qualified for a loan or you didn't, you either lived in this place or you didn't, and yet we don't see how similar the circumstances are. So the last thing I think I want to say is that the attitude of each of these kinds of policies and practices, the impact of them and the decision to make them is always affected and directed by race. And there's a large tendency in our country to deny that that's the case, or to hide that that's the case, and yet it's impossible to see to see it any other way unless someone's really in a state of denial. The history of white supremacy, the history of specific targets within racial groups is impossible to miss, and the specific impacts of these challenges to continue this trend all over the country. So whether it's in Skid Row in Los Angeles, it's Atlanta in the South, or New York City, or Detroit. There's every other place in the country that's had these sorts of circumstances, and there are places that are fighting them now, and yet there are many, many places that have already lost the battle. So the question, really quickly, of what we can do about it is first and foremost to talk about it. First and foremost to make sure that we explain and we think about the rationales that have been used, because if we don't, there's an individual reaction to it that ends up keeping us from being able to work together, and instead keeps us working at an individual level that is not very effective. If we work together and try the unity of the masses, we'll see a tremendous effort that's able to challenge this this tendency. We see it. We see an ability to take it to can't come up with words. Okay. So just what I guess I'd like to say is three things. To say that in order to address these practices, address all of these policies, whether it's in Skid Row and other communities, we first and foremost need to understand what's happened and talk about that. Secondly, we need to challenge it by leading with equity and leading with racial equity in specifics. Equity meaning, and this is something very hard for people to understand, although it's relatively simple, equity is not the same as equality. Equality is to give everybody the same exact thing, and it sounds wonderful, and equal opportunity and all that, and that doesn't work at all. And that doesn't work because we're not in the same situation to begin with, and you can't overcome 400 years, 500 years of oppression by saying, okay, we're all free and we can all do what we want. Well, first of all, we're not all free. But second of all, what equity does that is much more effective is that it gives people the ability to be judged and determined based on their circumstances, not based on some fallacy of what used to happen or what might happen in the future. Equity says you're here now, and if you're here, we need to get you there. And if we're here, we all have a chance to be there. Let's go. In taking that step forward, you may end up responding to one group that their needs are much stronger than another's, and so that means that they're going to get more services or get more attention or get more chance to apply the policy, they'll apply a system in a much more effective way. On the other hand, we want to make sure that we do that in a way that is not just limited to the front end of the problem, not just the question of access or opportunity, which are, again, like equality, sounding good, but access and opportunity only are very limited, are very. Okay. See, the problem is that if I say what I'm thinking, it's not effective. Well, it's effective, but it gets me in trouble. So the question being that access, like normally I would be fine with staying in trouble, but I'd be able to take care of myself, and I'm not feeling like I can take care of myself right now. So you want to be able to push for racial equity that addresses what the actual needs are, not what the assumptions are, and equity that doesn't just assume that if you have the opportunity, everything would be fine. We really want to see the outcomes. We really want to see the end result of the data. And so then the next thing I'd say is to really center a focus on wellness. We talk a lot about health in our society, and health is a good thing. I have nothing against health, but the idea ought to be not waiting until we have illness that needs treatment that is something we respond to. We should be treating our health as an absence of disease in a much more holistic way. It's more than insurance. It's more than what kind of medical care we need. And so we just want to make sure that people are asking for the reality and not, again, the assumption of what the minimum might be in order to address a particular issue. And the last thing is, it comes directly from the work that I've done with Charles and really seeing the USEP a model on so many different occasions, that when people raise an issue like addiction, when they raise an issue like the problems of poverty in the relationship to drug and alcohol use, there again is this a tendency to go straight to that problem and deal with that problem, and yet that's not the origin story. That's not the beginning. That's not the problem that is keeping all of us frantic and frustrated in the larger way that we are. And I'd say that we need to have a prevention attitude, an attitude of sustaining people and sustainability. And the largest one is to build connections and help maintain those connections. And so Charles mentioned a minute ago that we've been doing a project, depending on how I feel right now, I don't see how I could ever have done anything, but we've been working on a project very effectively and seeing the connections that USEP and USEP staff and Charles and a few of the other USEP staff people, and it's a very small organization, so it's really a testament to their determination. It's that building and keeping and maintaining a connection which is staved off addiction and eviction, but staved off addiction, staved off just the trauma that people sometimes have experienced. It is the thing that allows people to stumble and yet get back up again, or walk through the most startling and unexpected circumstances and come out on the other side. That connection, and Charles gives me this language all the time, but that connection is the opposite of addiction. That connection is the thing that really solves it. And I think when we see policymakers or government or these kinds of surveys and they're looking for solutions and they want to see something real quick, I always think, then you don't really want to solve the problem. If you wanted to solve the problem, then you'd support the connections and the recognition that people can be seen, they can be heard, they can be valued and valuable for who they are. So I'm going to stop. I am so sorry. I have to say I apologize. Where I am, but I appreciate being able to share.
We appreciate you, and you're in a safe space. So you can relax. You can relax right now until we get to the questions. I will say, just thank you for sharing. And then we're gonna pass the mic to Dr. Grills. Dr. Cheryl Tawede Grills, one of the formulators of Emotional Emancipation Healing Circles, a member of the State Reparations Taskforce, will share her local work grounded in the experiences of the Black diaspora. Healing Circles, a national COVID stress survey, refresh spot data, and efforts around reparations in California. One thing that I want to also highlight, if you see one of the sections on the wall has Zora Neale Hurston, and the work that Zora Neale Hurston was doing at the time, people were like, why are you studying the beliefs of Black people? Why are you studying these superstitions and rituals and ceremonies? And I think it's very important just to connect culture. That's one of the things I've admired about Dr. Grills is her ability to understand indigenous African systems of belief and perspectives, worldviews, and how that connects to us being healthy and well.
I'm also a visual person, so I want to be able to show you some things, and then hopefully, if I can go through this really efficiently, I want to demonstrate something to really help you see what I'm talking about. Oh, cool. So this is all roads lead to community, okay? And at the end of the day, a neighborhood isn't always a community. A neighborhood is a place where people are together in a space, but they're not necessarily, as Mary put it, connected to each other. And there's an important difference there. In order to do some of the work that Mary was talking about, we need to be able to be in community. And then from that foundation, do the work of community so that the forces that Mary was talking about can stop dismissing us, erasing us, and dehumanizing us. So with that, the reality is that for Black folk and people of color, we don't see an American dream, we see an American nightmare. And in the context of that nightmare, we are trying to live lives. We are trying to stay sane. We are trying to maintain our health.
Yes.
And that's hard to do. And we're also trying to speak our truth.
Yes.
And that too is hard to do. So we also then realize that we are given kind of fake examples of doing those things. But the reality is, as this professor says, people say if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. Most of the time we're on the menu, but it's more to it. As she says, it's more than that. It is how you are at the table. If you don't decide what's on the menu, if you are invited after the menu is set, you are still a guest.
Oh, no.
How do you be a guest in your own home?
Oh, come on.
Now, last time I checked, we're all Americans, right? So this is supposed to be our collective home.
Correct.
But we are treated as guests, sometimes on the menu, where they're deciding, are we the appetizer, the main course, or the dessert?
That's right. Yeah.
So at the end of the day, because of that context, we're dealing with multi-generational oppression, injustice, and chronic stress. And you see what happens in those figures, what ends up happening to our sense of connection to each other, which is our lifeline. There's an African proverb from Senegal, and it says, we are each other's medicine.
All right.
But we can't be each other's medicine if we are disconnected because we're so stressed out.
Teach.
So that oppression, that injustice, that chronic stress, it impacts us psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, and physically. It literally can affect our very souls.
Yes, yes, indeed.
It can compromise our sense of agency, like that we can make things happen, that we can have the ashe, and it can take away our sense of hope. It also, most critically and in a heartbreaking way, can compromise our ability to see each other, be with each other, and do that from a place of compassion and connection.
Facts.
That at the end of the day, if you're not doing well, I'm not doing well.
That's right.
If you're not okay, how can I possibly say I'm okay? But this country was kind of defined on a principle that some people get to be okay, and the rest of us just got to deal with it.
Yeah.
So Baldwin nailed it. He said people are trapped in history, and history is trapped in them. We are still living out the history, the shameful history of this country.
Come on now.
Now, here's a little tidbit. I was reading while I was in Ghana. I was taking students on study abroad to Ghana. And I was reading Richard Wright's book, Black Power. And there's a little paragraph in there that I said, if white people read that paragraph, we could see another revolution in this country. That little paragraph essentially pointed out that it was not just Native Americans and not just Black folk who were really being taken advantage of in this country. This country was defined for land-owning white men, period. Poor white folks were being used and abused like there was no tomorrow. And then when they had to open up the society to everyone, they had to make sure that the poor white folks didn't recognize what was happening to them, and to keep them separated from the Black and brown, Native American, Asian American people. So what they did was they really worked this issue called race. And so for poor whites, they could say, at least I'm not Black. At least I'm not Latino. At least I'm not Native American, right? So it was a way to separate us. And it was a way for white folks to not see how their own lives were compromised and how their own identities were abused and how their own humanity may have been compromised by buying into that illusion, at least I'm not black. So I say, if we get together in community, we could collectively plot our escape. Okay? So, when we are faced with those circumstances that Mary was describing, that I was just alluding to, we end up experiencing trauma, racial trauma. And it happens at multiple levels. At the level of the individual, at the level of the collective, it is also historical and it's intergenerational. The reality is that I carry my ancestors' racial trauma.
Yes.
Not just, I'm not just talking in terms of some kind of analogy. I'm not talking just, psychologically. I'm talking at the very level of your genetics.
That's right.
Right? Epigenetics is finally catching up with what African wisdom knew, which is that we pass on to our children and our children's children's children the stuff that happened to us. So that today, my nervous system reacts much differently than someone who doesn't come from a family where they were lynched, where they were enslaved, where they were raped and beaten, etc.
That's right.
Okay?
That's right.
So then what are those signs of trauma? Irritability, inability to sleep, headaches, feeling shame, feeling hopeless, chronic pain, addiction, feeling depression. The list goes on and on.
Yes.
And so then what does Western medicine do? They give us some kind of pill.
Yeah.
Right? Take this pill and you'll get over it.
Pacify.
But the pill isn't dealing with the source of the problem.
No, it's not. No, it's not.
What it's doing is just passing this on to the next generation because you will not have resolved it to create a space so our children don't have to continue to live that life. We're talking about understanding stress and how it affects our nervous system. When we are stressed, we become mobilized to fight or to run or to tend and befriend or to appease the source of threat.
Yes.
Or we can become immobilized. We go into freeze. I don't know what to do. I'm just going to kind of look around and then hope maybe I can become invisible in the moment, right? Whenever we go into states of stress, we come out of our social nervous system, which allows us to be connected to each other, which allows us to have patience with each other, that allows for compassion, which allows for us to see, feel, and hear one another, which allows us to be vulnerable, right? And which allows us to heal.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, we gotta realize we're basically nothing more than animals.
Right?
We are designed just like lions and tigers and bears.
Come on.
And so if that tiger comes in the room, you're gonna fight, you're gonna flight, you're gonna go into freeze, or you're gonna faint. You're gonna become.
Wow.
And you never heard that expression, scared to death?
No.
Guess what? It's actually real. You can be scared to death. Because what happens is if the threat is so immense that you do what animals do, they play dead. You start shutting down pieces of your nervous system so that you can let the predator know, hey, I'm dead meat. Don't eat me because it'll make you sick. But animals continue to practice that ability. We stop doing it because we're so cognitive and we think things through. We're rational. But so that when we use it, we don't know how to stop, going and shutting stuff off, and we can't cut it back on.
Wow.
And we die.
Wow.
I love this. I feel like I'm in church.
It's the truth that I hear all the time. I hear a lot of other stuff. I don't hear reality.
I hear you. So what are we talking about then? We end up dealing with not allostatic load, which says,
When to fight back.
huh?
When to fight back.
When
I thought
to-
you were going to mention about animals.
Yeah.
Some
When we
of
fight.
them- Some of them fight you back.
Yeah, some of them, yes, we fight and then the animals may fight us back and we might lose. So you got to do careful calculations to see what your odds are, right? Now, one of the things that happens is that, when you're in stress, the medical system talks about this thing called allostatic load, that you actually can bear a certain amount of stress, and it's okay. Your system can handle it.
Right.
We, however, deal with allostatic overload. Now, what does
All the
that look
time,
like?
that's right.
Anybody remember what movie?
Yes.
Predator.
Yep.
If Predator came in the room today, right now, in this moment, here's what you do. Okay? And if you run fast enough, because if you do the calculation, you're not going to beat Predator, so you're not going to fight him. This is time for flight.
Right.
So you run, you outwit Predator, you get away, and then what happens next? You chill. Right? And in that scenario, job well done. That's an example of normal allostatic load.
Okay.
Now here's us. Now what's wrong with this picture?
No.
You wear out just
There's no chill. No
Well,
chill.
you run, you're doing a whole lot of running.
Whole lot.
But my question is, what are you running from?
Yeah.
There's nothing there, right? But if you're on constant alert, if you're hyper vigilant, if you're waiting for the next shoe to drop, then you're always ready and in fight-flight mode. In that scenario, my dog goes, what are you doing? What are you running from?
Me too.
Right? And if you keep doing that, what happens when you put too many things into one single outlet? Overload. You will blow the fuse.
Blow it.
That's what we do to our nervous system, and that's why we end up with some of the health problems that we have.
Wow.
So at the end of the day, we're just like lions and tigers and bears. Oh my. Right? And our brains act just like the lions and tigers and bears. Now, we think that when something happens, we go and we do this calculation. Should I run? Should I fight? Should I pretend to be dead? Whatever. And that's the thinking part of our brain. That's the evolved part of being human. But the reality is there are two other parts of our brain that are still operating. Our reptile brain, right here, is in everybody in this room. And when this takes over, when a situation happens, we act purely on instinct. If I did something like that to Charles, but he didn't see me doing that, he would jump. That's instinct, right? Sometimes it is appropriate to do that because you need snap judgment, like milliseconds response. But otherwise, this gets you into a lot of trouble. And then over hundreds of thousands of years, another part of our brain developed called the limbic system. So reptile brain was first, then the limbic system came, and that's when we operate off of emotions. You ever seen the person who's angry and everything they're doing is coming out of that anger?
Yeah.
And then over more time, we evolved to our rational thinking brain, where we make judgment. We say, okay, let me think. Now, should I do this? Should I do that? If I do this, this will happen, etc. That's what we want to do most of the time. And if you think about your hand as an illustration of that, this is the reptile brain, this is the limbic system, and then this is your rational brain taking over. This is how you want to operate most of the time. But this, flipping our lid, is how we actually walk around in the world. Because we're overstressed. We're in allostatic overload. And again, that taxes us. So what does resilience look like? And that's and by the way, resilience is not hardiness, that plant coming up through the concrete. That is not resilience. Resilience is much broader and requires a lot more work. And when you see it and you feel it, oops, let me back it up. How does that feel? Right? It's like, this is how you do. That's the way resilience feels in your body. That's the way it looks like, those two babies there. But that's not a plant coming up through concrete, right? This is resilience. Being in community with each other, having spirituality, exercising, celebrating one another, doing meditation, right? Dancing and singing.
Amen.
And the question is, woo! Now that's what resilience feels like,
Okay, it do feel like that.
right?
It's really-
But you can't get to that just by saying, I'm just gonna get over this. You gotta work at it.
Take all of
And you
that.
gotta put all of these different elements into your life.
That's what the power is.
And that's what will offset that allostatic overload.
Awesome.
Right?
Awesome.
So as I begin to kind of get to my real point here, you said, wait, you get to your real point? We're talking about the freedom to be and the freedom to do.
All right. Now.
Right? If your soul is on fire to serve in a way that scares you to death, and you don't feel worthy, ready, or able, and the burning will not leave you alone,
Oh my goodness.
congratulations,
Wow.
you have your calling.
Oh my goodness.
Your calling to serve. We are all here to serve one another. If we had that attitude, a lot of the problems that we experience and a lot of the things that are done
Yes,
against us
yes.
would not be happening.
Yes.
Right?
Awesome.
But in order to get to this, we have to understand what is going to help us to have the freedom to be and the freedom to do. It will not be the land-owning white males.
Just shoulders.
Yeah.
Just shoulders.
Yes, that's one of the ways.
Yeah.
That's one of the ways. So you remember Luther's song, "A House Is Not a Home"?
Yes.
Right? So, and I said, I'm using that as an analogy that a neighborhood is not a community.
Right.
A neighborhood is a place. A community is people who feel a sense of connection and responsibility and love for one another.
Come on.
Right?
Yes.
So this is a neighborhood. They're in the space, but they're kind of alone. This is a community where people are in constant connection with one another,
Yes.
feeling each other, doing for each other, doing with one another.
Connected.
Yeah, like we do
And
in
being
LA.
right, and being in community
Right.
also means you realize that every stream has its source. What do I mean by that? That our culture is important. We come from somewhere.
That's right.
We come from traditions. We come from a set of values
Yes.
that give us a roadmap to be in and to do community, right? So we have to build on our cultural wisdom, values, practices, and principles if we're going to be able to manage that allostatic overload and then stop being on the menu. One of the ways we do that is through emotional emancipation circles. This is an example of the circles that we developed as a partnership between the Association of Black Psychologists and the Community Healing Network, where the ultimate goal is to defy the lie of white superiority and embrace the truth of Black humanity, right? And these circles have principles that are grounded in African cultural wisdom. And there are 7 keys to this emancipation. And each key unlocks something. And when it unlocks it, then it leads to action.
Wow.
We've been doing these circles in Virginia, in the United Kingdom, in Manchester, in Brixton, and London, and in Havana. I just did a circle in Cuba about 4 weeks ago, in Havana. And we're doing circles in South LA, and we're doing circles now, again, in Skid Row,
Praise
right?
God. Praise God.
For the ones in South LA, right, the vision and the process, we revolt simply because for so many reasons we can no longer breathe. That's what Fanon said. And we can't breathe because we don't have any space to have our humanity respected, to have a place to unpack that American nightmare I talked about earlier, and to figure out how to reclaim our cultural traditions to point us forward so that we can do Sankofa, right? Look at the past so we understand how to go forward.
Amen.
Right? So the South LA Healing Circles are not the emotional emancipation circles. They were introduced to it, but I said, you have to create your own circles. So together, this is what the community in South LA came up with. It's something that's led by peers, so they have ownership. There's an importance put on intergenerational connection, that the elders have something to say,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And it creates these safe spaces where people can do the work of exhaling, releasing, de-stressing with tools to build their resilience. And there's grounding through connection to the ancestors and cultural roots. And at the end of the day, it was also designed ultimately to disrupt violence in South LA, which, by the way, the data showed for that very first summer that we really tracked the data, violence went down, right?
Great.
So the definition is that South LA healing circles are gatherings led by peers that promote intergenerational connection in a safe space where people can exhale, release, and de-stress, supported by tools and grounded in connection to ancestors and culture, which ultimately will disrupt violence. The community did that, not some PhD in the ivory tower.
Awesome.
And it's very simple. There's an opening with a call and response part, and people kind of get focused and mindful. There's the meat of the circle where people have a topic that they're going to unpack and deal with. And then there's a closing where you reaffirm the values to promote community, right? And at the end of the day, it's what you see there ultimately. It does personal healing, but it does community healing,
Yes,
which builds
it does.
community connection. The other thing is the importance of salud bona, the ability to see each other, to hear each other, and to feel each other. I'm gonna come back to that in a second, because that's the quick activity I'd like to do. But first, we have to be in community, then we have to do the work of community. If we do the salud bona, then we are in community. You'll see what I mean in a minute. And then to do the work of community, examples from Skid Row, what I call the Cheers effect, the refresh spot. So you remember the sitcom Cheers?
Yeah. Everybody knows your name.
Sometimes you wanna go where
Everybody knows your name. And they're always glad you came. You wanna go where you can see.
The troubles are all the same.
You wanna go where everybody knows your name.
That refresh spot was not just a place to go take a shower, or to use the toilet, or to recharge your phone. It was a place where people were in community with each other. And they created that spot through their own design. This is what it should look like. And then here are our guiding principles and values. And as you walk up on the space, I mean, you could be like maybe a quarter of a block away and you could hear the soul music playing. And when people walked in, there was somebody at the table that knew their name. And then as they waited for their chance to take the shower, they were talking and sharing stories and laughing and joking with one another. And what did we find out? At the end of the day, that space was positively impacting people. Folks felt more refreshed, more comfortable. They felt a little bit happier, a little more peace, inner peace. They felt like they were more confident. I watched one woman, she walked in like this to go take her shower. And I was there long enough to see when she came out. This is how homegirl came out.
All right now.
She was just flipping her hair. I was like, is that the same woman, right? That went into that shower stall that came out. But also what happened? People were less irritated, people were less angry, and people were a little less self-conscious, right? So it's not just the space, it's that the space was community. We did the COVID needs assessment. I'm not gonna go through all this data, but I wanna point out something. When you let the community show what's important, you realize that that's the best science in the world. When people were talking about what were their top sources of stress during COVID in Skid Row, housing, physical health, financial concerns, but what was most important? Their mental health, right? And what were they doing to cope? Talking to family and friends, right? Listening to music. Music heals. Those rhythms is not just entertainment. And we now have some research data to substantiate that. And then they were talking to a healthcare provider and mental health professionals. But look at that was 23% compared to let me just talk to the people in my world, right? And so one of the things that we find is that when it comes to doing this work of community, you gotta make sure it's building on what people naturally want to do and find healing. And it's that talking, it's that music, it's that sense of connection. And it's being able to do things to remind us of our connection to one another. So one of the things that we do in the healing circles, and this is the same across all the ones that I described, is what's called the Mbangi Pledge. It was taught to us in the Association of Black Psychologists, a small group of us, by Baba Fukiao, who's since passed on, and he came from the Congo. And he basically laid out what are the essential elements to be able to be in community. So I'm going to invite you to say them with me. I'll say it in the Kikongo language, and you can do the English translation. To support our relationships with each other and to not be on the menu, we pledge to Sala Sana.
To help each other.
We pledge to Tunga Sana.
To build each other up.
To Lunga Sana.
To teach each other.
And to Vova Sana.
To speak to each other.
We pledge to Zaya Sana.
To know each other.
And to Luenga Sana.
To be aware of each other.
We pledge to Buka Sana.
To heal each other.
And to Tonda Sana.
To thank each other.
We pledge to Kinsa Sana.
To care for each other.
And to Seva Sana.
To laugh with each other.
Laughter is important. Okay? We pledge to, when necessary, Natasana.
To carry each other.
And always to Zita Sana.
To be respectful of each other.
And without fail, always, 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 we pledge to Zola Sana.
To love each other.
And when we do these things, we can breathe. Our souls can be replenished. Mabande Ubuntu, may the spirit of Ubuntu multiply and prevail. And if we can do if we just did those things, within our racial ethnic groups and across racial and ethnic groups, it's a game changer. So do we have 3 minutes to do the interaction?
Yes.
Okay, so we cut the lights on, and I'm going to ask you to form a circle in the back of the room. All right. Now, I'm going to ask you and you to come in and face outward. Okay, close your circle. Then you and you can come in and face outward. And you, sorry. Okay, now, face outward. Face outward. Face out. Face out. Yeah. Okay, now, the other folks around the circle, come and find a partner. So, no, you stay where you are.
Come in the circle or among ourselves?
No, you're gonna find somebody who's facing you. Right here. You're facing. Okay, you got a partner. You can back up here. This is my partner. I know, but I need you to come into the circle. Okay, everybody's got a partner. Yeah. All right. This is what we're doing now is this is a chance to really see each other, which means to salubona. Salubona is a South African term which means I see you. That's how they say hello to each other. I see you, which is more than just physically seeing them. It means I am present and I'm taking responsibility to really check in to see how you're doing and to be responsible for your well-being. So this is an opportunity to salubona because too often we see each other and we see ourselves and each other through the lies, the biases, and the stereotypes that take our humanity away in the eyes of each other and ourselves. So this is a relational exercise to salubona beneath, behind, and beyond appearances. This is an invitation to see, hear, and feel each other. So I'm going to invite you to look into the eyes of your partner.
Oh, Lord.
And just listen and follow my instructions. So you need to come in a little closer because you're kind of far out. With your partner. All right. Okay, here we go. Just listen to my words. I see you. No, just listen. I see you through eyes that transcend my own sight. I see you beneath superficial impressions, beneath stereotypes, projections, expectations, beneath ego and reputation. I see you beyond your contradictions and circumstances. I see you behind the walls you have put up and the masks you have put on. Outside circle, I want you to rotate one person to the left. Outside circle, move one person to the left. Inside circle, don't do anything. Okay? One person to the left. You have a new partner. Look into the eyes of your new partner. Okay? Are you ready? Are you listening? Okay. I see your humanity and your humanness. One voice. I see your divinity, the radiance of who you really are. I see you at your best, manifesting your greatest purpose and your soul's calling. Everyone repeat after me. I see the soul of who you are. I see you. Outside circle, move one person to the left. Okay. Okay. Now I need you to look into the eyes of your new partner. You have two people. All right. I hear you. Looking into the eyes of your new partner, I hear you. Just listening. I hear you through ears tuned in to the whisperings of soul and spirit. I hear you beneath what you say, open your eyes and look, beneath the words you use and the language you speak. I hear you behind what has been silenced and hidden. Outside circle, rotate one person to the left again. All right, look into the eyes of your new partner. I hear you. I hear you beyond what I want to hear. I hear your truth, the truth of your lived experience. I hear the voice of your deepest intentions, who you really want to be and how you really want to act. I hear your dreams and highest aspirations. Everyone repeat after me. I hear the soul of who you are, I hear you. I hear the soul of who you are, I hear you. Rotate, outside circle, one more person to the left. Now look into the eyes of your new partner. Okay? All right, here we go. I feel you. I feel you from the vibration of our oneness, where our souls recognize each other. I feel you behind the visible and invisible barriers that separate us. I feel you beyond any mental, emotional, or soul bondage. I feel your freedom and your liberation. I feel the power of your ancestors flowing through you over generations, across space and time. I feel your rhythm, your unique expression. I feel your vulnerability and your victories, your struggles and your strength, your tears and your triumphs, your regrets and your risings. I feel the love within you. I feel your heart. Everyone repeat after me. I feel the soul of who you are. I feel the soul of who you are. I feel you. I feel you. This was an opportunity to do the kind of connecting we don't do in our everyday life. If you feel so inclined, thank the people that you just witnessed. Give them a bump, a hug, whatever feels like it.
And I was hoping that they would be able to cover a lot of things. Just like the exhibit, there's a whole lot of stuff in this exhibit, and it takes maybe a lifetime to, it takes a while. And so we're not able to cover every topic that I thought we would today, but I will respect the time of folks that are here. I'm just gonna open it up for people that came here, that made the effort to get here. We're gonna field a few questions. I think we're gonna go till 2:30 is probably our kind of land the plane time, but we'll take a few questions for the panelists, Lorraine and then.
Okay, my name is Lorraine, and you know what? I just want to say thank you so very much for your long introduction about certain things, because this is about you, and you brought our guests to talk to us. And it's awesome, and you have been working here a long time with the people. And what she talked about really opened my mind about when the communities, you brought something to my attention when you said, because section, general relief was down here on 4th Street. So they knew everybody's addresses. So when you talked about a community, and people had to write their address, all that kind of stuff. It was right in the heart where they allowed people to go to shelters, to low-income housing. But they all had the same zip code because it was right there in Skid Row. So they knew where the people was. So why wasn't it a community when you was putting money out there? They didn't have any markets, only the Skid Row market. They only had liquor stores and stuff like that. But they knew what the surroundings was about. And you brought that to my attention. And it's not like they didn't know how to open a community when you had the people in there giving them money, $200 or whatever dollars, just to barely survive. And so we go back to what she was talking about, thank you very much, but they knew where it was, and they knew how to make a community, and this is something we keep fighting for to make happen today. Right. And when she stood up there and talked about stuff that I have never, ever saw a black woman stand up, I'm telling the truth, talk about what she talked about on this board. Now, I don't know if that's right or wrong, but I've heard a lot of people fighting for Skid Row and what they didn't believe in and what is this and that. But if I believe that we have a representation like you did, telling the truth about black, white, and everybody else.
Yes, the truth.
The truth will set you free.
That's what it does.
And then we can all come together and make it right.
Amen.
There's no right and there's no wrong.
No, it's not.
It's about justice for all.
For all.
And that's what it's all about. And when she sit there and talk, I was like, I never heard a black woman talk about anything like that. I heard about what I've been through. I did it. But you came up with a plan to show the people the truth. Like the exhibit here at the museum. We don't know about ancestors. We don't know about all that kind of stuff, But this young man did. And he brought two amazing women that are talking the truth. And I had to say, for Los Angeles Poverty Department, we do commit together, and it has opened up my life in such a wonderful way. Before we do rehearsals, anything, these white folks help us come in center with ourselves and get along with everybody. We was on Zoom for a whole year for a play.
Yes, we were. Gave computers to everybody.
And I'm talking about patience. They have so much patience for us. It's not like we're white and your asses better do what we tell you to do. No, they show us how to do it. To give us what you was talking about, courage, to have an attitude of gratitude. Not to be mad at the world, because we belong here together.
That's right.
And I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart, because now I have a new stepping stone from all of you. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Then Minister Foote.
I will be short. So I just wanted to say that, I was actually doing a paper on macro social work before I came here, and I have to go home and finish it. But I'm so glad I came because I got a lot of really introspective, really as it relates to like community. We were in my paperwork, we were talking about what does community mean? What does macro social work mean? And what I'm learning from you all, and what I'm learning, I had never heard the term macro social work prior to today. But then coming here, you all offered me a perspective on macro social work, because this is actually what you're doing. You're going around the world actually doing macro social work. But then in healing communities. But then also here in Skid Row, we have layers of systemic challenges and complexities. It's not just like we're talking about City Hall, or we're talking about like what's going on in our federal government. We have layers, even as we call ourselves a community. There's still challenges that I feel as a Black woman who was displaced here. And I quantify that by the fact of, Black middle-aged elderly women tracking as a #1 demographic, not just year after year, but decade after decade by huge disproportionate numbers. As Dr. Lee was saying, none of this is by accident, it is actually by design. And how do we get here then, right? So as someone myself who's a community advocate and speaks on a national level on policies and so forth, I want to know from you all, how do we deal with the systemic inequality as it relates to those of us who were displaced here, and then those of us who tend to run the organizations. And when I'm in that Zoom meeting, what I'm looking at is not reflecting back that looks like me, or running the nonprofits and the missions and the this and the that. And then so I'm in school now, studying community advocacy, social policy, and the Watts School of Social Work at ASU downtown here. Thank you. And what I'm aware of, I actually call it that a lot of the nonprofits really kind of run like a slave plantation. So how do we get to that? How do as all of this money is being dispersed, and we talk about the need for healing, and we talk about how do we deal with like right now, I'm trying to fight for trying to get a scholarship to school, and we know all this money is being, delved out, and yet you can't get any access to anything. And I can't help. There's people with all this power, but and there's so much capitalism in it. And my mother just passed away about a month and a half ago, and one thing is that, I was saying in an email letter to someone on a national level yesterday, like, people have like $10, $20 million, and it's just like, where, like, I said, if my mother had the money, had the capital that you all have, the work that she did from a grassroots level in the community, and yet, you all don't seem to move a needle, even with all the money. There's still all the systemic inequality of you're running the organizations, and we stay our asses right here. How do we change that? How do we shift that?
So I'm going to try to answer this quickly because this is the crux, I think, of so much of what we're all up against. And if anything, you've got to keep your focus on what you need from you. You have to be able to pursue the loans, the applications, the process, if that's the path that you want to go in. But if you do that, you always have to recognize that it's a farce, that it's a game that you're in, and you get what you need to go forward. But you still need to be able to focus on the ultimate goal, the ultimate objective. And if you, regardless of what you're doing personally, so maybe you do that, maybe you don't, you have to make that decision. But the rest of us out here still have to go forward in the kind of work that Cheryl's talking about, the kind of strategies that we know need to exist in order to change the world itself. On another day, I would be so able to talk to you about this. It's so frustrating to me that I don't have language. But understand that the system wins when we're all stuck in it, fighting it. And if we're fighting it, even though we might be, some of us might get a little degree, or we might end up with a certificate of some sort, and that's a good thing. It is never going to change itself. It's really a distraction, if you will, or it's something that keeps us 10 times longer working around that circle, while we still need to be able to focus on getting to the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal may not even be where the system, those struggles are, I'm so sorry. Okay. I thought, when you were talking, I thought I had exactly the answer for you, and it's just, I cannot get the words to come out. My point being, you have to keep your eye on the ultimate objective. You have to keep your eye on what you said was being able to change the circumstances, fight the strategies, use your talents and your knowledge, which you don't really get from the school. They are refining and perhaps giving you some access to information and to some methodologies, but you already have what you need in order to graduate. And I understand that you want that certificate, or you want that credential, and there's nothing wrong with going after that. But ultimately, that's not going to be what changes reality for our communities or for our people.